So the 8 limbs of yoga, or Ashtanga Yoga from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, are intended to create an environment both externally and internally that is conducive to meditation. An environment that leads to peace, toward harmony, and ultimately toward stillness and transcendence. Let's take a high-level look at the 8 limbs of yoga. Now, as I open the screen here, you'll see quite a few Sanskrit words shown here. Now, don't worry about the Sanskrit. We're going to go through each of these one at a time, and there will be opportunities to dive much deeper into these concepts in upcoming lessons and courses. But keeping this high level for now, the 8-limbed model is laid out from the gross to the subtle. Not gross as in disgusting, but gross as in obvious, explicit, things that we can experience or observe toward the subtle, toward the more essential, quieter aspects of the capital S self, or a spiritual experience. You might remember from earlier, one of the definitions of yoga is this gross to subtle path is leading toward a state in which the self abides in its own true nature. In the next couple of sections of the course, we're going to dive deeply into the yamas and niyamas, which are the first 2 limbs. And the reason these are included in this course that's based on living yoga off the mat is that these are things that we interact within ourselves and with others in the world. And these are really tangible, practical lessons and practices that we can use day to day. Now, the word yamas is translated as restraints, and this is a set of moral and ethical standards. Again, we're going to dive deeply into this in the next section of the course, but just as a high level, I'll give you just a quick rundown and translation from Sanskrit to English. Now, the word ahimsa is translated as nonviolence. Satya is truthfulness. Asteya is non-stealing. Aparigraha is non-attachment or non-hoarding. And brahmacharya is abstinence, impulse control, or energy management. A few different translations there, which we'll take a look at. Now, moving on to the niyamas, the second of the 8 limbs. Niyamas is translated as observations. So this is a set of basic internal practices that we endeavor to do. So again, a quick translation of each of the Sanskrit terms here. We have saucha, which is cleanliness or purity. Santosha, which is contentment. Tapas describes discipline, or sometimes describing stoking the inner fire. The fourth one here, a fun one to say, is svadhyaya. Svadhyaya describes self-study. So the study of ourselves and also the study of yogic texts. And then finally, the 5th of the niyamas is called Isvara Pranadhana, which is surrender to the divine, or surrendering to that which is beyond our control. Again, I've just shared a lot of Sanskrit here. Don't worry too much about it. We'll have a nice opportunity to dive into each of these concepts very shortly. But continuing with just a high-level overview of moving from the gross to the subtle, the 3rd of the 8 limbs is asana, a term you're likely familiar with if you practice yoga on the yoga mat. The 4th limb is pranayama. So you may have heard of pranayama in your practice already, or heard of the term prana, describing life force energy. So this is a regulation of vital life force energy. Now, as this model moves from the gross to the subtle, and it's moving toward a pathway of Raja Yoga or meditation, the 5th limb, called pratyahara, is almost sort of a gateway from the physical to the non-physical. Pratyahara is defined as withdrawing from the senses, or withdrawing from our sensory experience of the outside world. Now, the last 3 limbs are sometimes grouped together or described together because this is where the practice becomes a practice of meditation. The word dharana is translated as concentrating on a singular point. So dharana describes the actual practice of meditation or the training of the mind to meditate. The seventh limb, called dhyana, describes the state of meditation that can sometimes just happen almost spontaneously through the practice of dharana. And then finally, the eighth limb is called samadhi. You might remember this term from earlier, which describes the state of experiencing the capital S self. It's describing the state in which the self abides in its own true nature. So this again was just a high-level overview of the 8 limbs, just to contextualize where the yamas and niyamas fit into this model. In the next couple sections of the course, let's take a deeper dive into the yamas and niyamas.